So next we're going to be talking about basic collections care. So these are the simple things that you can do to protect against those agents of deterioration. So we're going to cover controlling the storage environment, how to secure and handle materials, housing and storing materials, and knowing what you have through an inventory. All of these topics are very, very big, so we're just going to scratch the surface. But before we dig in, it is time for a quick pep talk. You may find that you're only doing one or two of the suggested best practices, or that maybe you're not doing any of them, but that's okay, because that's why you're here. You're here to learn. There's a lot of information about what to do, and you may find it's a little overwhelming, but I want you to remember that remember progress over perfection. So you may not be able to get to the level that you're supposed to be at, but you may be able to improve from where you are now, and that is progress. And any progress is a win. Slow and steady wins the race. You may not be able to do all of the things right now, and that's okay. And it's pretty unlikely that you're going to be able to do all of the things anyway. Just choose a couple of things to work on. And once those are in good shape, choose something else to improve upon. Small steps count, and this is all progress. And always be kind to yourself, because you are still learning. So with that in mind, I want to dive in. So we're first going to cover the control of the environment that materials are stored in, starting with temperature and humidity. So materials should be stored below 70 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer, and in general, cooler is better. In the winter, you want to keep the temperature above 50 or so, just to prevent humidity from getting higher, because remember, humidity and temperature are interrelated. At a constant dew point, a change in one can affect the other. So what you really are aiming for, ideally, is a stable range of humidity between about 30 to 50%. And you really want to avoid fluctuations as much as possible between high and low temperature and high and low humidity levels, because those ups and downs can really stress materials, especially paper, as they stretch to absorb and release moisture. But we all know Vermont's environment can vary dramatically between winter and summer, and spikes and dips in temperature and humidity as much as possible should be kept to a minimum. But how can you be sure that you're accounting for those seasonal fluctuations, and how can you keep a stable environment? So the best way is to get some data first. So understand what's happening in your space through environmental monitoring. Monitoring tracks temperature and humidity over time, identifying patterns and fluctuations, providing you with data that shows where actions can be taken. And even when actions have been taken to mitigate temperature and humidity problems, you should continue monitoring to see what further improvements can be made to make sure things are still working, and to identify any equipment malfunction as soon as possible. So even if you have heating, a heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system, or that's better known as HVAC, and that system tracks its own performance, it's still better to monitor with another tool as a backup. So there's several options for doing environmental monitoring, and you can go from a more manual sort of snapshot approach by taking readings from just a simple temperature and humidity gauge and writing them down. Or you can go a little bit more automated and sophisticated, and you can use the data logger, which is what's shown here on the screen. And this is something that continuously records and stores readings and can provide you with more robust data. And the VHRP, we've launched last summer an environmental monitoring program to help Vermont repositories establish what those baseline conditions for storage environments are over the course of a calendar year. So we can loan data loggers, and we can help you interpret the data. Based on that data, we can recommend ways to improve conditions by drafting an analysis report at the end of the loan. This can help make a case for HVAC improvements or other kinds of equipment, which I'll get into. And it can also make the case for purchasing your own data loggers so that the storage environment can continue to be monitored. So for more information, you can check out the link on the screen, or you can reach out and contact us. So once you have that environmental data and you can see where it's pretty clear that some improvements should be made, you can control the environment by making the case for installing an HVAC system. That is an option. I will say another plus for more permanent HVAC systems is that they often include air filtration, which protects against those gaseous and particulate pollutants. But however, as we are all aware, HVAC systems aren't feasible for many organizations and many spaces. So there are other options. You can use freestanding equipment like air conditioners, dehumidifiers, humidifiers, or air purifiers in smaller areas. Freestanding units aren't ideal as long-term solutions, but if they are closely monitored to make sure they're operating as they should be and they're free of water buildup or leaks, they can be a really good solution. If possible, you'd want to seal windows and doors with caulk or foam tape, something like that, or some kind of weather stripping to limit the amount of outside air and to keep the indoor conditions more stable. You do want to think a little bit about airflow as well. If air can circulate well, it's going to help inhibit a mold bloom. So the one way to do that is to try to keep some space around shelving to allow the air to circulate around the materials and to avoid making pockets of stagnant air. And if you have some storage options, it might be better to store your materials in a more centralized place where conditions are likely to be better. So this means hopefully not in attics or garages or basements, but also ideally not near external walls if possible. If you find after environmental monitoring that your conditions are just really not good, it might be worth considering moving the materials out of the space entirely to another building or maybe even another repository if you can come up with an agreement until the conditions in your space can be improved in some way. So let's move on to another aspect of environmental control, and that is light. So the good news is protecting materials from light exposure is actually relatively simple. There's several quick fixes that can be implemented to minimize exposure, including storing materials in containers like boxes or filing cabinets, flat files. You can place darkening curtains or shades or UV film over windows and storage areas. You can simply turn the lights off when the storage area isn't actively being used. And you can consider swapping out your old incandescent or fluorescent lights for LED bulbs, which helps minimize that UV exposure. It is, of course, much easier to protect materials in storage than when they're on exhibit or on display. So you do need to consider the condition of the items that you're exhibiting and determine if they should be or can be exposed to more light. And you may want to consider making a good quality facsimile or copy that you can display instead of the original. The storage environment can be threatened by bugs and rodents that see materials, particularly paper records, as sources of food. They're attracted to areas that have human food crumbs and trash. So eating and drinking should be prohibited in all spaces where records are stored or used or on display. And trash should also not be kept in these spaces. If you can, sealing points of entry in the storage area or the building at large will help reduce the threat from pests. So if you're finding holes where rodents might be getting in, you can seal those holes with caulk or expandable foam, or even steel wool is a pretty simple tactic that can prevent bugs and rodents from entering. Regular housekeeping, like vacuuming, dusting, that's also really important. Cleaning does not have to be constant. We probably don't constantly clean at our house either, let's be honest, but just a good spring or fall cleaning might be all you need just to get rid of those layers of dust and dirt. And housekeeping isn't good just for keeping pests away, of course. It can eliminate that dust and dirt and those other particulate pollutants that can abrade and scratch records. So monitor for pests by looking around your space for any visual evidence of bugs, such as holes, powdery substances, droppings, dead bugs, egg casings, that kind of stuff. You can also place a sticky trap or two that might catch any pests that aren't observed when you're just looking around visually. It's not recommended to use pesticides because they are toxic and have a lot of chemicals that can be bad for your historical materials. The Northeast Document Conservation Center has a really great leaflet on integrated pest management, which is linked here, but that link is also available on our resource library, and I'll give you the link to that at the end of our time today. Okay, so now you've stabilized temperature and humidity, you've reduced the threat of light exposure and pests, but what about keeping your materials secure from theft, vandalism, or improper use? So the most obvious way to protect against theft, vandalism, unsafe use is just keeping the materials locked up when they're not in use. So also having an inventory of your holdings will make it easier to know what's missing. And of course, having an added layer of building security with like an alarm system, that really helps if that's something feasible for your organization. And supervising the materials while they're in use can really help deter improper handling. So this might mean placing a table where a staff member or a volunteer has a line of sight to where someone is researching. You could have a policy that you won't allow someone in a vault or a storage area unless they're accompanied by a staff member or a volunteer or someone associated with your organization. You might want to consider not allowing bags near the materials, bags and purses, briefcases. You could have a coat rack or a locker or something near the entrance for researchers to place their belongings when they come in. And you may also want to consider having a policy of checking researcher papers when they leave, possibly. Sometimes theft is unintentional and a researcher might accidentally scoop up a record with their own notes. Supervising the use of materials not only protects against theft and vandalism, but helps to ensure that they're handled with care. So users may have the best intentions, but they might not know how to properly handle materials, and that might inadvertently cause physical force damage like breaks and tears. So here are some ways to handle materials with more care. Always use pencil around when you're writing around materials. You can't erase ink, so don't use pens. Always move fragile items with care. If you're making copies of a bound book, don't press the book face down on the photocopier glass. This could break the binding. Just taking a digital photo often will work instead. And if you're copying loose sheets of records, do not put them through the copier's automatic feeder. They could get caught and damaged. Just put them on the glass one at a time. And if you are carrying larger, fragile documents, you might want to use a large piece of cardboard or plexiglass as a support to carry this larger document from place to place. With all of these security and handling rules, it's really best to write them down so that they can be applied consistently, but that they can also be shown to researchers that it's a way to protect the materials, not just arbitrary rules. So we figured out how to make a safe, stable environment for our materials, but how do we actually store and house them? Improper storage can result in physical force damage, such as creases and tears. Housing materials in acid-free boxes can also prevent dust and dirt from getting inside, but the buffer in the acid-free material can help protect against those gaseous pollutants that might be in the air. Containers also act as a barrier to light exposure, and they're the first things to get wet during a flooding event. So lots of layers of protection if you're putting things in boxes and containers. So loose paper records should be stored in folders and boxes. These should be, or at least the folders should be, acid-free to protect against chemical changes in paper that could happen over time. Storing books or bound volumes on a shelf is fine, but they should be upright and not leaning. If the volumes are large, it's fine to store them flat. If the volumes are fragile, they could be stored in flat boxes on a shelf, and that's another layer of protection. Large papers can be housed in a flat file or in a large flat box, or if they're really, really, really long or really, really large, like a map, They could be carefully rolled around an acid-free tube. Photographic materials can be housed in plastic sleeves, but it should be a stable plastic. So that would be polyester, polypropylene, or polyethylene. Or they can be housed in acid-free paper envelopes or folders. So some of the most common suppliers for archival boxes, folders, and other supplies include University Products, Gaylord, and Hollinger Metal Edge. Supplies can be expensive, it does add up, but they do have sales from time to time, so that's always worth checking to see if there's something you can get in when it's a sale time. And keep in mind that different record formats might require different types of storage. So as we've discussed, standard papers are different from bound volumes, which are different from large maps, which are different from photographs. You can learn more from our resource library, which is linked here on the screen. And how about shelving? So as a general rule, shelving should have a smooth, non-abrasive finish and just be free of sharp exposed edges or bolts. Shelves should be able to support a minimum of about 200 pounds, and they should be deep enough that boxes don't hang over the edge. So what's considered the best is powder-coated steel shelving, but really any non-rusting metal is fine. Sealed wood can also work, but as we talked about with gaseous pollutants, you should just be careful of the sealants that are used in that wood. In vault settings, roller shelving has often been used. It's really ideal for records that are in very large bound volumes. The great thing about having stable shelving is it can provide support and protect against abrasions and breaks and that physical force damage. So materials should be stored above the floor in case of ground flooding, so at least about 3 to 4 inches. This can be achieved through shelving, which you can see here in this picture, but you could also raise boxes off the floor by putting them on wooden pallets. It's important to store hazardous and flammable materials like paints and solvents away from collections and to store them safely. So buildings and facility managers would have a good idea of how to properly store these materials, as well as your local fire department. And materials should also be stored away from pipes in case of leaks. So you want to also make sure that the roof is in good shape because that will prevent leaking in your storage areas and other building areas as well. So now that your materials are well cared for, it's time to understand what you actually have in your holdings. Having inventory can help you be more familiar with what you have, and being more familiar with what you have prevents the dissociation of items from their context. So what are some other reasons that you should have an inventory of your materials? Well, it can help you quickly identify the needed records to fulfill a request. It can point researchers to specific materials that they might want to use. It could reduce the risk of theft by documenting what you have. It could aid in disaster recovery by helping determine which materials have been damaged. And it can give you a baseline from which to make decisions on next steps or activities or projects. So for example, you may decide that you need to rebox some materials, but you won't know how many boxes that you need until you know how much material with what dimensions needs to be housed. The basic data that should be recorded about each grouping of records would be record type, date range, size, and how much shelf space it needs, the storage location, the basic condition, and you may want an additional description if more information is necessary. So an inventory can be done in a simple spreadsheet to have all of the information in one place. Just decide at what level that you want to inventory. So you could capture these data elements at a very high broad level. So just writing them down for an entire record type, like all of your maps or something. Or you could go a little more granular and capture the information more at the box level, see what's stored in each individual box. Or if you want to get even more granular, even at the folder level within each box. but really whatever level makes the most sense for your organization and your practices is the right level at which to inventory. And you can learn a little bit more about inventorying in a short video on our YouTube channel, and I've linked that here as well. So we've covered hands-on approaches to care for your materials, but collections care really extends to broader activities too. It can include building maintenance, installing fire detection and suppression systems. It's developing collections policy and actively managing your collections. And it's also long-term planning for preservation, for access, and for more. Assessing your risks and preparing for emergencies is also another way to care for your collections by making sure that they're protected in the event of a disaster. We have an online training module on our website all about emergency preparedness, and it's at the link on the screen.